The photographer's lens captured the exact moment my sister shoved me out of the frame. 300 wedding guests watched as I stumbled backward, my bridesmaid's dress catching on the marble steps of the chapel. But what happened 6 hours later changed everything. When that same photographer called my name in front of everyone, when he held up the cover of Bridal Elegance magazine with my face on it, the silence in that reception hall was deafening. My sister's perfect wedding became the night that launched my career and shattered every lie she'd built about who deserved to be seen. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning of September 14th started with the kind of golden light that photographers dream about. I should have taken it as a sign. Instead, I was hunched over my laptop in the hotel room adjacent to my sister's bridal suite, frantically editing photographs from a fashion shoot I'd completed just days before. The deadline for the portfolio submission was that afternoon, and this was my shot at breaking into the industry I'd been fighting to enter for 3 years. "Madison, get in here." Brooklyn's voice pierced through the wall like a blade. My sister had perfected that tone somewhere between childhood and her engagement to tech mogul Ryan Caldwell. It carried the authority of someone who had never been denied anything she wanted. I saved my work and stepped into the chaos next door. Brooklyn sat in the center of it all, a goddess in silk and lace, surrounded by her army of bridesmaids, makeup artists, and hairstylists. The scene looked like something from a magazine spread, which, I realized with a pang, it probably would be. Brooklyn had sold the exclusive rights to her wedding photos to 3 different publications. "Where have you been?" she demanded, not looking up from her phone, where she was approving social media posts. "The photographer has been asking for you. We're starting the pre-ceremony shots in 10 minutes. James Mitchell stood in the corner, his camera already hanging around his neck. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of quiet intensity that came from seeing the world through a viewfinder. His reputation preceded him. He'd shot covers for Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and every major bridal publication. Having him photograph Brooklyn's wedding was a coup that our parents had paid dearly for. "You must be Madison," he said, extending his hand. "I've heard a lot about you." I wondered what exactly he'd heard. Probably the standard family narrative. Brooklyn, the successful influencer with 500,000 followers, and Madison, the sister who does photography as a hobby. The sister who worked 3 part-time jobs to afford equipment while pursuing a dream that everyone politely dismissed. "Let's start with the bride alone," James announced, and the room shifted into professional mode. I watched him work, studying his technique, the way he manipulated light and shadow, how he directed Brooklyn with gentle authority. She glowed under his attention, every pose effortless and elegant. "Beautiful," he murmured, the camera clicking rapidly. "Now, let's bring in the bridal party." The other bridesmaids filed in, Brooklyn's college sorority sisters, all blonde and polished, all comfortable being photographed. I hung back, adjusting my dress. It was the same style as theirs, but somehow on me it felt wrong. Too tight in some places, too loose in others. Brooklyn had insisted we all wear the same size, claiming it would look more uniform in photos. "Madison, you're in the back row," Brooklyn directed, not looking at me. "Try not to look so stiff." I took my position behind her left shoulder, the traditional spot for family. James raised his camera, adjusted his settings, and began shooting. Through the lens, I could see him studying the composition, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Hold on," he said, lowering the camera. "Madison, can you step forward a bit? The lighting is hitting you perfectly from this angle." Brooklyn's smile tightened imperceptibly. "Actually, let's do one with just my sorority sisters first. Madison, you can wait outside." The dismissal stung, but I was used to it. I had been waiting outside Brooklyn's spotlight my entire life. I stepped into the hallway, pulling out my phone to check the time. My portfolio deadline was in 4 hours, and I still had 2 more photos to edit. 20 minutes later, the door opened, and the bridesmaids spilled out, laughing and checking their phones. James emerged last, reviewing images on the back of his camera. "Your turn," Brooklyn called sweetly. "Let's get the family shots over with." The chapel was draped in white roses and soft lighting. Our parents had already taken their positions, beaming with pride. Dad looked distinguished in his tailored tuxedo, while Mom practically glowed in her mother of the bride dress. They'd always said Brooklyn would have the wedding of the century, and they'd spared no expense making it happen. "Let's start with parents and both daughters," James suggested, gesturing for me to join them at the altar. I moved into frame beside Brooklyn, who immediately angled herself slightly forward, a subtle move that would make her more prominent in any shot. It was something she had learned from years of posing for her social media brand.
"Perfect," James said, but I caught him glancing at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Madison, tilt your chin up just slightly. That's it." The camera clicked, capturing what would become one of the few photos of that day where I appeared relaxed, natural. In that moment, standing in the golden light streaming through the stained glass windows, I felt like I belonged. "Now, just Brooklyn and the parents," Mom suggested quickly. "We want plenty of options for the albums." I stepped aside automatically, muscle memory from 26 years of being the supporting character in Brooklyn's story. But as I moved, I caught James watching me again, his expression thoughtful. The ceremony itself was a blur of pageantry and perfection. Brooklyn floated down the aisle like she was born to be a bride, every step choreographed for maximum impact. Ryan waited at the altar, his face soft with genuine love. Whatever else I thought about my sister, I couldn't deny that he adored her. I stood with the other bridesmaids, holding my bouquet and smiling on cue, while James moved silently around the perimeter, capturing every angle. Professional wedding photographers were invisible until they weren't, and he had perfected the art of being everywhere and nowhere at once. During the vows, something unexpected happened. Brooklyn's carefully composed facade cracked slightly, and real emotion flickered across her face. For just a moment, she wasn't the influencer or the perfect bride. She was just a woman in love, vulnerable and radiant. James caught it. I saw the moment he recognized the shot, the way his body language changed as he captured Brooklyn at her most authentic. It was the kind of photograph that would define a career, the kind that magazines fought over for covers. But then Brooklyn's walls went back up, her professional smile sliding into place as she turned toward the cameras she knew were there. The moment was gone, but James had it preserved forever. The receiving line stretched endlessly, guest after guest offering congratulations and posing for selfies with the happy couple. Brooklyn was in her element, gracious and glowing, while I stood to the side with our cousins making small talk and trying to look like I belonged. "Such a beautiful wedding," everyone kept saying. "Brooklyn looks like a princess." She did, but as I watched her work the crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing from all this perfection. Maybe it was the way she toned between conversations, or how her smile never quite reached her eyes when she thought no one was looking.
"Ladies, we need to move to the reception venue for the next round of photos," James announced, appearing beside us with his equipment bag. "The golden hour lighting there will be incredible." The reception hall at the Grandview Estate was everything Brooklyn had dreamed of. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in cream silk, while floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the gardens beyond. It was elegant, expensive, and absolutely Instagram perfect. "Let's start with some candids during cocktail hour," James said, already moving through the crowd with practiced ease. "Then we'll do the formal shots before dinner." I found myself gravitating toward the windows, where the natural light was softest. Years of studying photography had taught me to read light like a language, and this was poetry. I pulled out my phone, not to take photos, but to adjust the settings on my camera app, a nervous habit I'd developed. "You have a good eye for light," a voice said behind me. I turned to find James standing there, his camera lowered for once. Up close, I could see the laugh lines around his eyes, the calluses on his hands from years of handling equipment. I dabble, I said, the standard response I'd perfected for moments like these. Brooklyn mentioned you're a photographer too. The surprise in his voice told me that wasn't exactly how Brooklyn had phrased it. I'm working on it, still learning. He nodded, but there was something in his expression that suggested he saw more than I was admitting. What kind of work do you do? Before I could answer, Brooklyn appeared beside us, her arm sliding possessively around James's elbow. James, we need to get those sunset photos before we lose the light. Madison, can you help coordinate the bridesmaids? And just like that, I was dismissed again, relegated to the role of assistant rather than equal. I watched James allow himself to be led away, but not before he glanced back at me with what looked like curiosity. The next hour was a masterclass in Brooklyn's ability to command attention. She posed effortlessly in the gardens, her dress spread around her like spilled cream, while James captured shot after shot. The other bridesmaids giggled and preened when it was their turn, but I hung back, content to observe. That's when it happened.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing the story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Okay, let's get one big group shot with all the bridesmaids and the bride, James called out, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. We arranged ourselves on the marble steps leading down to the gardens, Brooklyn in the center like a queen surrounded by her court. James positioned us carefully, adjusting angles and checking his light meter. Madison, can you step up one more step? I need to balance the composition. I moved where he indicated, and suddenly I could see what he saw through the viewfinder. The way the light caught my hair, the line of my dress against the marble, the natural curve of my smile. For the first time all day, I felt photogenic. Perfect, James said, raising his camera. Everyone hold... Wait, Brooklyn interrupted, her voice sharp. Madison, you're blocking my dress. Move back. But the lighting, James started. Move back, Madison. There was steel in Brooklyn's voice now, the tone she used when her authority was questioned. I hesitated for a moment, caught between the photographer's direction and my sister's demand. In that hesitation, Brooklyn made the decision for me. Her hand connected with my shoulder, not hard enough to truly hurt, but firm enough to send me stumbling backwards off the step. My heel caught in the hem of my dress, and I went down hard, landing in the grass with a graceless thud that sent dirt scattering across the white silk. The silence that followed was deafening. 300 guests turned to stare. Some gasped, others whispered behind their hands. A few people even laughed, thinking it was some kind of clumsy accident. But James's camera had caught it all. The push, the stumble, the moment of shocked silence before Brooklyn's mask slipped back into place, and she extended her hand to help me up, playing the concerned sister for the crowd. Oh my God, Maddie, are you okay? How clumsy of me. I stared up at her from the grass, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time, the calculated concern, the practiced sympathy, the way she angled her body so the photographers would catch her good side, even while helping her fallen sister. Our parents rushed over, fussing and brushing dirt from my dress, but their attention was perfunctory. Already I could see them calculating how to minimize the disruption to Brooklyn's perfect day. I'm fine, I said, standing on shaking legs and forcing a smile. But I wasn't fine. As I walked away from that marble staircase, dirt still clinging to my dress and my dignity in tatters, something fundamental shifted inside me. I was done being invisible, done being pushed aside, done pretending that Brooklyn's happiness was worth my humiliation. I didn't know it yet, but James Mitchell's camera had just captured the moment that would change everything. Not the push, not the fall, but what came after. The moment when I lifted my chin, straightened my shoulders, and walked away with more grace than Brooklyn had shown all day. That photograph would be worth more than any of the perfect pose shots from earlier. It would be worth everything. The guest bathroom on the second floor of the Grandview estate became my refuge. I locked the door and finally allowed myself to breathe, leaning against the marble vanity as I assessed the damage to my dress. Grass stains decorated the silk like unwanted embroidery, and my carefully styled hair had come loose during the fall. But it wasn't the physical mess that bothered me. It was the familiar sting of being erased, pushed to the margins of my own family's story. Again. I pulled out my phone to check the time. 2 hours until my portfolio submission deadline. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Brooklyn was being photographed by James Mitchell, I was hiding in a bathroom trying to salvage my own photographic dreams. The portfolio represented 3 years of work, dozens of shoots done for free or for gas money, countless hours learning lighting techniques, studying composition, building a body of work that I hoped would finally prove I was more than just Brooklyn's sister with a camera. My fingers moved automatically to open the photo gallery on my phone. The images I'd been editing that morning stared back at me. A fashion editorial I'd shot in downtown Portland last week using natural light and abandoned warehouse spaces because I couldn't afford studio time. The model was Emma Chen, a struggling actress who'd agreed to trade her time for images she could use for headshots. The photos were good, better than good. Emma's vulnerability came through in every frame, the harsh industrial setting contrasting beautifully with her delicate features. I'd captured something raw and authentic, the kind of work that made art directors take notice. But nobody knew about these photos. Nobody knew about any of my work.
3 years ago, when I'd first bought my camera with money saved from working double shifts at the coffee shop, Mom had patted my hand indulgently. "That's nice, dear. Maybe you can take some pictures at family gatherings." She'd said it the same way she might have commented on a new hobby, like scrapbooking or knitting. Photography wasn't a career in her mind. It was something people did on weekends. Dad had been more direct. "Photography is a tough business, Madison. Maybe keep it as a side thing while you figure out something more stable." Only Brooklyn had seemed genuinely interested, asking to see my early attempts and offering encouragement. But even her support came with conditions. "You should focus on lifestyle photography," she'd suggested after looking through my first portrait series. "Like happy families and cute couples. That stuff sells. All this artsy, dramatic lighting is kind of depressing." I'd tried to explain that I was drawn to emotion, to capturing authentic moments that revealed something true about my subjects. But Brooklyn had already moved on to the next topic, her attention span exhausted. The real problem wasn't their lack of understanding. It was how they'd turned my passion into something to be managed, contained, made smaller so it wouldn't threaten the established order. When I'd landed my first paid gig photographing a local band's album cover, Mom had mentioned it at dinner in passing, like it was barely worth noting. But when Brooklyn had gained 1,000 Instagram followers that same week, Dad had raised a toast. When I had my photos displayed at a local gallery's emerging artists showcase, the family had politely attended for 20 minutes before leaving to grab dinner. But Brooklyn's appearance on a minor lifestyle blog had been celebrated with champagne and social media congratulations that lasted for days. The pattern was always the same. My achievements were footnotes in Brooklyn's story. Standing in that bathroom, staring at my grass-stained reflection, I thought about the portfolio deadline waiting for me. 3 magazines had agreed to review my work. Not major publications, but respected ones in the photography community, the kind of places where careers began. I'd submitted to them secretly, using my savings to pay application fees my family would have questioned. "Why waste money on submission fees when you could be building a real career?" Dad would have asked. The bathroom door handle rattled, interrupting my thoughts. "Madison?" It was Brooklyn's voice, syrupy with false concern. "Are you okay? People are asking about you." I doubted that. More likely someone had noticed the bridesmaid with dirt on her dress and Brooklyn wanted to manage the narrative before it affected her image. "I'm fine," I called back, quickly fixing my hair. "Just cleaning up." "The photographer wants to get some more shots before dinner. James specifically asked for you to be included." That surprised me. Most wedding photographers would have written off the clumsy bridesmaid by now, focusing on the flawless shots that would make it into albums and magazine features. I opened the door to find Brooklyn waiting in the hallway, her wedding dress pristine and her makeup perfectly touched up. She looked over me critically, noting the stains on my dress with barely concealed irritation. Maybe you should stay in the background for the rest of the photos, until we can get that dress cleaned. It wasn't really a suggestion. We walked back toward the reception area in silence, Brooklyn's heels clicking authoritatively against the marble floors. Through the tall windows, I could see guests mingling on the terrace, cocktails in hand, the golden light James had been chasing now reaching its peak. He was stationed by the garden stairs where I'd fallen earlier, adjusting his camera settings while surveying the scene. When he spotted us approaching, his expression shifted from professional concentration to something more personal.
"Madison," he said, stepping forward, "I wanted to check on you. That was quite a tumble." "She's fine," Brooklyn answered before I could speak, just a little embarrassed. "You know how clumsy she can be." The comment stung, because it wasn't true. I'd been dancing since I was 5, had played varsity soccer in high school. I was coordinated, athletic even. But Brooklyn had just rewritten history with a single sentence, creating a narrative where my fall was a character flaw rather than her action. James looked between us, his photographer's eye clearly seeing more than we thought we were revealing. Actually, I got some interesting shots during that moment. Sometimes the unplanned images are the most powerful. "Oh, you don't need to use those," Brooklyn said quickly. "We have plenty of beautiful posed shots. Let's focus on those." But James wasn't looking at Brooklyn anymore. He was studying me with the intensity he'd shown earlier, like he was seeing something the rest of my family had missed. "Madison, can I ask you something?" he said. "That camera bag I saw in the bridal suite earlier, is that yours?" My heart stopped. I'd forgotten about my equipment bag, hastily stashed in the corner when I'd been summoned for photos. It was battered and practical, nothing like the designer accessories surrounding it, but it contained my most prized possessions. "She dabbles," Brooklyn said dismissively. "Takes pictures at family events, that sort of thing." "What kind of camera?" James pressed, ignoring Brooklyn's attempt to minimize. "Canon 5D Mark IV with a 50mm f1.4 and an 85mm f1.8. James's eyebrows rose slightly. That wasn't hobbyist equipment. That was the kit of someone serious about their craft, someone who'd invested significant money and research into building a professional setup. Those are excellent lenses, 85mm especially, great for portraits. Brooklyn's smile was becoming strained. "We should really get back to the photos. The light is changing." But James seemed to be having a different conversation entirely. "Do you have any work online? A website or portfolio?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. This was the moment where I either continued playing my assigned role or stepped into the light. "I'm actually submitting to some publications today," I heard myself say. "The deadline is in an hour or two." Brooklyn's head snapped toward me, surprise flickering across her features before she composed herself. "Madison, you didn't mention that. How exciting." Her tone suggested it was anything but exciting. But James looked genuinely interested. "Which publications?" "American Photo Magazine, Lenswork, and Portrait Photography Quarterly," I said, gaining confidence with each name. These weren't Instagram-famous lifestyle blogs. They were respected journals that established photographers read and contributed to.
"Those are serious publications," James said, and I could hear the respect in his voice. "Especially Lenswork. They have a reputation for discovering new talent." The conversation was interrupted by the wedding coordinator, an efficient woman with a clipboard who'd been managing the day's timeline with military precision. "Mr. Mitchell, we need to move toward the dinner shots now. The caterers are ready to serve, and we're losing our window for the table arrangements." "Of course," James said, but his attention lingered on me for another moment. "Madison, I'd love to see your work sometime, maybe after the festivities wind down." Brooklyn's arm slipped through his with practiced ease. James, you're such a sweetheart for encouraging her hobby, but tonight is about celebrating, not talking shop. As they walked away toward the reception tables, I remained by the garden stairs, watching James work with a mixture of admiration and longing. He moved through the crowd like a visual poet, capturing moments that others missed, finding beauty in the spaces between the obvious shots. This was what I wanted. Not the hobby version my family had assigned to me, but the real thing. The life of someone who saw the world through light and shadow, who could freeze time and reveal truth in a single frame. My phone buzzed with a notification, 1 hour until the portfolio deadline. I slipped away from the reception, finding a quiet corner near the coat check where I could work without interruption. The Wi-Fi signal was strong and my laptop battery was charged. I opened the files I'd been editing that morning, Emma Chen's haunting portrait staring back at me from the screen. For the next 40 minutes, I lost myself in post-processing, fine-tuning exposure levels and adjusting color balance with the precision of someone who'd spent years learning the craft. Each adjustment was deliberate, purposeful, building toward a vision that existed fully formed in my mind. The work was good. I knew it was good. These weren't the safe, pretty images that Brooklyn thought would sell. They were challenging, emotional, the kind of photographs that stayed with viewers long after they'd turned the page. At 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the deadline, I hit send on 3 separate email submissions. My portfolio was out in the world, carrying my hopes and 3 years of hidden work with it. When I closed my laptop, the reception was in full swing. Through the windows, I could see Brooklyn and Ryan having their first dance, her dress spread around them like a fairy tale illustration. James circled them with his camera, capturing the romance and elegance that would undoubtedly grace magazine covers. For a moment, I felt the familiar pang of exclusion, the outsider watching through glass while life happened to other people. But then I looked down at my laptop, thinking about the portfolio now sitting in editorial inboxes across the country. For the first time in years, I'd bet on myself instead of waiting for permission to dream. Tomorrow, everything might change, or it might not. But tonight, I'd stopped being invisible to myself. And sometimes that's where visibility begins. The rehearsal dinner had been my first warning that this weekend would be different. Brooklyn had insisted on hosting it at Meridian, the trendy rooftop restaurant downtown where she'd built relationships with the management through her influencer connections. The space was gorgeous, all glass and steel with panoramic city views, but it came with an unspoken hierarchy that placed me firmly at the bottom. I'd arrived early, hoping to help with setup, only to find Brooklyn directing a team of staff members who treated her like visiting royalty. Her phone was constantly in her hand, capturing behind-the-scenes content for her social media audience of 650,000 followers.
Madison, thank God you're here, she'd said when she spotted me. Can you handle the gift bags? I need them arranged by table number and make sure the ribbons are all facing the same direction. My followers will notice if anything looks sloppy. Gift bags. I'd driven 3 hours from Eugene, taken time off from 2 different jobs, and spent money I couldn't afford on a bridesmaid dress, only to be assigned grunt work that any intern could handle. But I'd done it. Arranging 120 gift bags with surgical precision while Brooklyn posed for photos with the restaurant's signature cocktails. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see her reflection in the glass, checking her angles, adjusting her hair, making sure every spontaneous moment was perfectly curated. "She's really built something impressive," our cousin Jessica had commented, appearing beside me with her own phone out, recording Brooklyn's impromptu photo session. 500,000 followers! That's basically a full-time salary. Jessica wasn't wrong. Brooklyn had monetized her lifestyle with the precision of a Fortune 500 company. Sponsored posts, affiliate marketing, brand partnerships, appearance fees. She'd turned being beautiful and aspirational into a 6-figure income. What Jessica didn't know was how that empire had been built. 2 years ago, when Brooklyn was still struggling to break through the crowded influencer market, she'd asked to borrow some of my photography equipment for a brand collaboration. A skincare company had offered her a small contract, but they wanted professional quality images, not iPhone selfies. Just for one shoot, she'd promised. I'll be super careful with your stuff.
I'd said yes because she was my sister, because she'd seemed genuinely excited about the opportunity, because I wanted to support her dreams the way I hoped someone might support mine someday. The shoot had gone well. Too well. The images I'd helped her capture had a depth and quality that her previous content lacked. They'd caught the attention of a major beauty brand, leading to a bigger contract, which led to more opportunities, which snowballed into the influence empire she commanded today. She'd never mentioned my contribution, not in the captions that accompanied those breakthrough posts, not in the interviews she'd given about building her brand, not even in private conversations with our family. The equipment, the lighting techniques I'd taught her, the composition principles I'd shared, all of it had been absorbed into her success story and erased from the narrative. When I gently asked about credit, she laughed it off. "Come on, Maddie, it's not like you took the photos. I was the one in front of the camera. You just pressed a button." Just pressed a button. As if 3 years of studying light and shadow, of learning to see the world through different focal lengths, of developing an eye for the decisive moment, as if all of that could be reduced to mechanical action. But that had been Brooklyn's pattern throughout our lives. She absorbed what she needed from the people around her, then rewrote history to center herself as the sole architect of her achievements. During our senior year of high school, I'd spent months helping her with calculus, tutoring her through problem sets and test prep until she'd raised her grade from a D to a B+. When she'd been accepted to her dream college, partly based on that improved GPA, she'd told everyone about her natural aptitude for math and her ability to figure things out independently. In college, when she'd struggled with a public speaking class required for her communications major, I'd spent weekends coaching her through presentations, helping her overcome stage fright and develop confidence in front of audiences. Those skills had directly contributed to her success as an influencer, her ability to appear natural and engaging on camera. But when lifestyle bloggers interviewed her about her natural charisma, she never mentioned those practice sessions in my dorm room. The pattern was always the same. I provided support, she achieved success, and then the support was edited out of the final story. Standing in that rehearsal dinner venue, arranging gift bags while Brooklyn basked in admiration, I'd felt the familiar sting of being useful but invisible, essential to the operation but absent from the credits. The dinner itself had been another masterclass in Brooklyn's ability to command attention. She'd given a speech thanking everyone for their love and support, her voice carrying perfectly across the room as she spoke about how blessed she felt to be surrounded by such amazing people. "I couldn't have gotten here without my incredible family," she'd said, her gaze sweeping across our parents, our extended relatives, landing briefly on me before moving on. "Their unwavering support has meant everything." Unwavering support. That was one way to describe it. Another way might be unpaid labor, uncredited contributions, and constant ego management. After the dinner, as guests mingled on the rooftop terrace, I'd found myself in conversation with Ryan's college roommate, Marcus, who worked as a creative director for an advertising agency in Seattle. "You're the photographer, right?" he'd asked, surprising me. "Hobby photographer," I'd corrected automatically, the disclaimer so practiced it felt like a reflex. Marcus had looked confused. "Really? Because Brooklyn mentioned you'd done some of her early brand work, the photos that really launched her career. She said you had a great eye." My heart had stopped. Brooklyn had told someone about my contributions? Maybe she'd been more grateful than I'd realized. Maybe she'd simply forgotten to give me public credit, but privately acknowledged my role. She said that? Yeah, she was telling us about how she'd had to work with this amateur photographer early on because she couldn't afford a professional yet. Said it was a nightmare, having to direct every shot and fix everything in post. But it taught her what not to do when she finally had a budget for real photographers. The words had hit like a physical blow. Not only had Brooklyn erased my contributions, she'd actively rewritten me as an obstacle she'd overcome. The equipment I'd lent, the techniques I'd taught, the hours I'd spent helping her create content,
All of it had been transformed into a story about her perseverance despite inadequate help. I had excused myself from that conversation, claiming I needed to check on something, and had spent the rest of the evening in professional smile mode, making small talk while my mind reeled. That night, alone in my hotel room, I'd pulled up Brooklyn's Instagram account and scrolled through her breakthrough posts from 2 years ago. The images were still there, still gathering likes and comments, still serving as the foundation of her influence empire. I could see my work in every frame. The way I'd positioned the natural light streaming through her apartment window, the composition techniques I'd shared from my photography classes, the depth of field effects that could only be achieved with the professional lenses she'd borrowed from my kit. But looking at her captions, reading the interviews she'd linked in her bio, scanning the comments where she responded to questions about her photography process, there was no trace of my involvement. She'd become the sole author of images that wouldn't have existed without my equipment, my knowledge, and my willingness to help. I'd screenshotted several of the posts, not out of spite, but out of a growing need to document the truth. Because I was beginning to understand that Brooklyn didn't just fail to give credit where it was due. She actively constructed narratives that erased inconvenient truths. The morning of the wedding had brought fresh confirmation of this pattern. I'd been in the hotel cafe grabbing coffee before the chaos of preparation began when I'd overheard Brooklyn talking to her maid of honor, Stephanie. I'm honestly relieved the photographer is so talented because Madison will probably try to take pictures with her little camera, and I don't want any amateur shots floating around online. James Mitchell's work is going to be flawless. Little camera. My Canon 5D Mark IV, which cost me 4 months of savings and represented the most significant investment I'd ever made in my craft, had been reduced to a toy in her narrative. Madison seems sweet, Stephanie had replied, diplomatically. She is, but she doesn't really understand boundaries. Like, this is my day, you know? I don't need her trying to play photographer when we have an actual professional handling everything. My hands had tightened around my coffee cup as I'd listened to my sister describe my passion as boundary-crossing behavior. The sister who'd borrowed my equipment to build her career was now positioning my presence as a threat to her special day.
But the conversation that had really shaken me had happened later, in the bridal suite, while I'd been editing my portfolio in the adjacent room. I'd heard voices through the connecting door and had recognized Brooklyn's laugh, followed by our mother's voice. "She'll be fine," Mom had been saying. "Madison's always been independent. Almost too independent, if you ask me. Sometimes I worry she doesn't need anyone." "I know what you mean," Brooklyn had replied. "She's so focused on that photography thing. It's like she thinks she's going to be some famous artist or something. It's kind of sad, actually." Kind of sad. My 3 years of dedicated work, my portfolio submissions, my dreams of building a career around my passion, all of it dismissed as delusion. Maybe when she settles down with someone, she'll find more balance. Photography is a nice hobby, but it's not really a life, is it? They'd been talking about me like I was a charity case, someone whose dreams were too big for her circumstances, someone who needed to be managed and redirected toward more realistic goals. What they didn't know was that I'd been supporting myself through photography for over a year. Not full-time, not glamorously, but consistently. Wedding photos for friends of friends, senior portraits for high school students, headshots for local actors and musicians. I'd built a small but steady client base, people who appreciated my work and recommended me to others. I'd never mentioned these jobs to my family because I learned early that anything I valued would be minimized, critiqued, or co-opted. My client work wasn't prestigious enough for them to brag about, but it was successful enough for them to question why I wasn't charging more, marketing better, or scaling up faster. So I'd kept it private, protecting my growing confidence from their well-meaning toxicity. But sitting in that hotel room, listening to them discuss my future like I was a child who needed guidance, rather than an adult who'd been making her own decisions for years, I'd realized something important.
Their opinion of my capabilities had nothing to do with my actual capabilities. They saw what they expected to see. Brooklyn, the successful influencer. Madison, the struggling dreamer. The narrative was so entrenched that contradictory evidence simply bounced off it. Even when I'd helped Brooklyn build her platform, even when my work had directly contributed to her success, the story they told themselves remained unchanged. Brooklyn was the talented one. Madison was the helper. As I had put the finishing touches on my portfolio that morning, preparing to submit to magazines that my family had never heard of, I had felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, but clarity. I was done trying to prove myself to people who were invested in not seeing me. I was done shrinking to make other people feel bigger. I was done being the supporting character in my own life story. The portfolio I'd submitted represented more than just 3 years of work. It represented 3 years of believing in myself, despite constant evidence that the people closest to me didn't believe in me. And in a few hours, when those magazine editors opened their email and saw my work, they wouldn't know anything about Brooklyn's influence empire or my family's expectations or the complicated dynamics that had shaped my confidence. They would just see the photographs. The work would speak for itself. For the first time in years, that felt like enough. The silence following my acceptance of James's offer stretched for what felt like an eternity. 300 wedding guests remained frozen in tableau, processing the revelation that the quiet bridesmaid they'd barely noticed was apparently talented enough to warrant a magazine cover story. Brooklyn stood at the center of it all, her wedding dress suddenly seeming less like a symbol of triumph and more like a costume that no longer fit the scene. Her face had gone pale beneath her professionally applied makeup, and I could see her mind racing, trying to find a way to regain control of a narrative that was slipping away from her. That's wonderful news, Madison," she finally managed, her voice carrying across the reception hall with forced brightness. "Though I have to say, I'm surprised you didn't mention submitting to magazines. We could have celebrated together." The comment was carefully calculated, designed to reframe the situation as a communication failure rather than a deliberate concealment. But James Mitchell had spent his career reading people through camera lenses, and he wasn't buying the performance. "Actually, Brooklyn, there's something else we need to discuss." He reached into his camera bag once again. This time he withdrew a tablet, its screen displaying what looked like a legal document. My stomach clenched. Something in his tone had shifted from professional courtesy to barely contained anger.
"I've been in this business for 15 years, James continued, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly attentive crowd. "I've photographed celebrities, politicians, royalty, and in all that time, I've never encountered a situation quite like this one." He turned the tablet screen toward Brooklyn, though from my angle, I couldn't see what he was showing her. Whatever it was drained the remaining color from her face. "This afternoon, while reviewing the contracts for tonight's shoot, I received a call from my assistant. Apparently, someone has been using photographs from my portfolio without permission, images that I own the copyright to, being used for commercial purposes without licensing fees or attribution." The reception hall had gone completely silent except for the soft whisper of evening breeze through the open terrace doors. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, sensing the gravity of whatever was unfolding. "The images in question," James continued, his voice gaining intensity, "were being used to promote a lifestyle brand's social media presence. Specifically, a series of photographs I took for a different client 2 years ago were being presented as original content by an influencer account. I felt the world tilt sideways as understanding crashed over me. 2 years ago. Brooklyn's breakthrough campaign, the images that had launched her influencer career and attracted her first major brand partnerships. "James," Brooklyn started, but he held up a hand to stop her. "The account in question has 650,000 followers and generates significant income from sponsored content. Copyright infringement on this scale isn't just unethical,
It's criminal. He turned the tablet toward the crowd, displaying what I now recognize as one of Brooklyn's most popular Instagram posts from her early influencer days. The image showed her in golden hour lighting, posed against a weathered brick wall, looking ethereally beautiful and effortlessly stylish. I remembered that photo. Brooklyn had been so excited about it, claiming it represented a breakthrough in her content quality. She'd shown it to our entire family, talking about how she'd finally figured out how to create magazine-worthy images. This photograph, James said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, was taken by me for a fashion editorial in Portland 2.5 years ago. The model was a professional named Elena Rodriguez. The styling, the location, the lighting setup, everything was my creative vision for that editorial. He swiped to another image on the tablet. This one showed the original photograph from James's portfolio, featuring Elena Rodriguez in the exact same pose, same lighting, same composition. What we have here, James continued, is not just copyright infringement, but identity theft. Someone digitally replaced Elena's face with Brooklyn's and passed off my work as their own. The gasp that rose from the crowd was audible, a collective intake of breath as 300 people processed the implications. Brooklyn hadn't just used James's photograph without permission, she'd literally inserted herself into his artistic work and claimed it as her own content. I didn't. Brooklyn stammered, but her protest died as James displayed more images, one after another showing her most successful early Instagram posts alongside the original photographs they'd been stolen from. Different photographers, different models, different contexts, but all bearing the same telltale signs of digital manipulation. Brooklyn's face, carefully composited onto other women's bodies, placed into scenes she'd never inhabited, claiming experiences she'd never had. 14 photographs in total, James said, his voice now carrying the authority of someone presenting evidence in a courtroom. Stolen from 7 different photographers, modified to feature Brooklyn's likeness, and used to build a commercial brand worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I stared at my sister, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. The breakthrough that had launched her influencer empire hadn't been the result of improved photography skills or better content strategy. It had been built on systematic theft of other artists' work. The really interesting part, James continued, is how sophisticated this operation was. The digital manipulation required significant technical skill, the kind of expertise that doesn't develop overnight. He turned toward our parents, who sat at the head table looking shocked by the revelations unfolding around their daughter's wedding reception, which led me to investigate who might have had both the technical capability and the access to help Brooklyn execute this scheme. My blood turned to ice. Suddenly, I understood why James had been watching me so intently throughout the evening, why his questions about my photography background had felt so pointed. 2.5 years ago, James said, Madison was taking advanced digital imaging courses at Portland Community College. Photoshop, Lightroom, digital compositing techniques, the exact skills that would be needed to execute this kind of sophisticated image manipulation.
The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Around the reception hall, I could see guests beginning to whisper to each other, putting together a narrative that made me complicit in Brooklyn's fraud. "You think I helped her steal those images?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying clearly across the silent hall. "Didn't you?" James replied, his tone suggesting he'd already made up his mind. The question hit me like a physical blow. After everything that had happened tonight, the recognition of my legitimate work, the magazine interest, the moment of validation I'd waited years for, I was being accused of being a party to Brooklyn's deception. "No," I said, louder this time. "I had no idea she was using stolen photographs." "But you were taking those digital imaging classes," James pressed. "You had the skills. Brooklyn doesn't." He was right about that. Brooklyn could barely use basic photo editing apps, let alone execute sophisticated digital compositing. But the implication that I'd helped her commit fraud made me feel sick to my stomach. "I took those classes to improve my own work," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, "not to help anyone steal from other artists." "Then how do you explain the technical sophistication of image manipulation?" James demanded. "This level of work requires professional-grade skills."
The crowd around us seemed to lean forward collectively, waiting for my answer. I could see doubt creeping into their expressions, the easy narrative of family complicity taking root in their minds. But then Brooklyn's voice cut through the tension, sharp with desperation. "Stop it!" she said, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. "Just stop it right now." All attention turned back to her. She stood in the center of the dance floor, her wedding dress spread around her like a pool of accusations, her face flushed with panic and rage. "Madison didn't help me with anything," Brooklyn snapped. She was too busy being self-righteous about her artistic integrity to get involved in anything remotely commercial. The admission hung in the air for a moment before its full implication sank in. "Then how were the images modified?" James asked quietly. Brooklyn's laugh was bitter, almost hysterical. "You really want to know? Fine. I paid someone. A freelancer in Eastern Europe who specializes in this kind of work. It cost me $3,000, but it was worth every penny because it gave me the career I deserved." The silence that followed was deafening. She had just confessed a systematic copyright infringement in front of 300 witnesses and a live streaming audience. "The career you deserved?" I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. "Brooklyn, you stole from other artists. You built your entire brand on other people's work." "So what?" she shot back, her mask of perfection finally abandoned. "Do you know how impossible it is to break through in this industry? Do you know how many beautiful women are posting content every single day, fighting for the same followers, the same brand partnerships?" She gestured wildly, her movements sharp with frustration. "I needed something that would make me stand out, something that would get me noticed. Those photographers were already successful. They didn't need those specific images, but I did." The rationalization was breathtaking in its selfishness. She had convinced herself that theft was justified by ambition, that other people's creative work was hers to claim if she needed it badly enough. "And it worked," she continued, her voice rising with each word. "I built something incredible. I created a brand that inspires people, that makes them feel beautiful and confident. I turned myself into someone worth following." "You turned yourself into a fraud," James said flatly. "Every follower, every brand partnership, every dollar you've earned, all of it based on stolen work." Brooklyn's face twisted with rage. "And what about Madison's precious portfolio? Do you think those magazines would be interested in her work if she wasn't my sister? If she hadn't had access to my wedding, my connections, my photographer?" The attack was so unexpected, so vicious, that it took my breath away. Even now, even caught in the middle of confessing to systematic fraud, Brooklyn was trying to diminish my achievements. "Actually," James said, his voice cutting through Brooklyn's rant with surgical precision, "Madison submitted her portfolio before she knew I would be here tonight. The work that impressed American Photo magazine was created entirely independently, using her own equipment and vision." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like email correspondence. "In fact, the editor specifically mentioned being impressed by Madison's ability to create professional quality work despite obvious resource limitations. They called it authentic artistry, uncompromised by commercial considerations." The description hit Brooklyn like a slap. Commercial considerations, the exact corruption that had led her to steal rather than create. "Furthermore," James continued, "after reviewing the images Madison captured today with my backup camera, I'm recommending her for inclusion in next month's International Photography Awards. The work demonstrates a natural eye and technical proficiency that can't be taught or faked." He turned toward me, his expression softening from interrogator to ally. "Madison, I owe you an apology. I suspected you might be complicit in Brooklyn's fraud because I couldn't believe she could have executed it alone. But watching you work today, seeing your genuine passion for the craft, reviewing your original portfolio work, it's clear you're an artist in your own right." The vindication felt surreal after years of having my work minimized and dismissed, but it was overshadowed by the reality of what Brooklyn had become, the extent of the deception she'd built her life around. "The question now," said James, turning back toward Brooklyn with renewed authority, "is what happens next. Copyright infringement on this scale carries serious legal consequences. The photographers whose work you stole have grounds to sue for damages that could easily exceed your entire net worth. Brooklyn's face had gone white. Around the reception hall, guests were beginning to murmur among themselves, the fairy tale wedding dissolving into whispered speculation about lawsuits and fraud. But there's another option, James continued. Full disclosure. Public acknowledgement of what you did, proper attribution to the original artists, and restitution for the commercial value you derived from their work. He paused, letting the weight of the choice settle over the room. You can either face this honestly, or you can let it destroy you in court. Brooklyn stood in the center of it all, her perfect wedding dress now seeming like evidence of a life built on lies. The choice was hers, but everyone in that hall knew her career as she'd constructed it was already over. The only question was whether she'd have any integrity left to salvage from the wreckage. Brooklyn stood frozen in her wedding dress for what felt like an eternity, the weight of James's ultimatum settling over the reception hall like a shroud. The livestream cameras continued rolling, broadcasting this moment to thousands of viewers who were witnessing the real-time collapse of an influencer empire built on stolen foundations. "I need time to think," Brooklyn finally whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmur of guests who were processing the magnitude of what they just witnessed. "Time is exactly what you don't have," James replied, his tone sharp with professional authority. "Every hour this goes unaddressed, more damage accumulates. More followers see fraudulent content, more brands base partnerships on stolen work, more legitimate artists suffer from your plagiarism." He gestured toward the crowd of wedding guests, many of whom were now openly staring at Brooklyn with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. "And now, you have 300 witnesses who can testify to your confession of systematic copyright fraud. The cat is not going back in the bag, Brooklyn." Ryan, who had been standing beside his new wife in stunned silence, finally found his voice. "Brooklyn, what he's saying, is it true? Did you really steal all those photos?" The question came out raw with betrayal. Ryan had built his own tech company from scratch, creating something legitimate through years of hard work. The idea that his wife had achieved her success through theft clearly struck at everything he valued. Brooklyn's composure cracked further. "Ryan, you don't understand. The influencer industry is impossible to break into without advantages. Everyone cuts corners. Everyone bends the rules." "Not everyone commits systematic fraud. Not everyone builds their entire career on stolen work." The words hit Brooklyn like a physical blow. She looked around the reception hall, searching for support, for someone who might understand or defend her choices. But every face reflected the same mixture of disappointment and disgust. Our parents sat at the head table in shocked silence. Dad's expression was unreadable, his businessman's mind probably calculating the financial and legal implications. Mom looked like she was watching a stranger, seeing her golden daughter clearly for the first time. "The legal exposure alone," Dad said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood business consequences, "could bankrupt our entire family. If those photographers sue for damages, they could claim everything, your house, your accounts, potentially even family assets if they prove we benefited from the fraud."
A mercenary calculation in his voice seemed to wound Brooklyn more than any moral condemnation could have. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice rising with hysteria. "You're all just going to abandon me? After everything I've accomplished? After all the recognition I've brought to this family?" "Recognition built on lies," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since James had cleared me of complicity. "Brooklyn, you didn't accomplish anything. You stole from artists who worked years to develop their skills, their vision, their unique voices." She whirled toward me, her face twisted with rage. "Don't you dare lecture me about artistic integrity. You think your little magazine feature makes you better than me? You think your precious portfolio is so superior?" "I think it's mine," I replied simply.
Every image I submitted was created by me, with my equipment, using skills I developed through years of study and practice. That's the difference between us." The simplicity of the statement seemed to cut deeper than any complex argument could have. Brooklyn's entire defense rested on the idea that everyone compromised, everyone cheated, everyone took shortcuts. But here was proof that success was possible through legitimate means. James stepped forward, pulling out his phone. "Actually, I think it's time we address this situation comprehensively." He began typing rapidly, his fingers flying across the screen. "I'm sending a detailed report to the International Association of Professional Photographers, documenting every instance of fraud I've identified. They maintain a database of copyright violations that other professionals can reference." Brooklyn went white. "You can't do that. It will destroy me." "You destroyed yourself," James replied without looking up from his phone. "I'm just documenting the wreckage." His typing continued for another moment before he looked up with grim satisfaction. "Done. By tomorrow morning, every major photography organization in North America will have a detailed report of your systematic theft." The finality of it seemed to break something inside Brooklyn. She sank onto the marble steps where she had pushed me hours earlier, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk. "My followers, my brand partnerships, everything I built." "Everything you stole," James corrected. "The question now is whether you salvage any integrity by coming clean publicly, or whether you let this destroy you completely in the courts." From across the reception hall, a new voice entered the conversation. "Actually, I think it's time we address this situation comprehensively." We turned to see a woman approaching, her business attire standing out among the formal wedding wear. She was perhaps 40, with short silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "Sarah Chen," she introduced herself, extending a business card towards James. "I represent Elena Rodriguez, the model whose likeness was stolen in those composite images." My stomach dropped. Elena Rodriguez, the original model from James's fashion editorial, whose face Brooklyn had digitally replaced with her own. Miss Rodriguez became aware of the fraud several months ago when friends began sending her Brooklyn's Instagram posts. "We've been building a case, collecting evidence, preparing for litigation." She looked directly at Brooklyn, who was still seated on the marble steps in her wedding dress. "What happened here tonight simply confirms what we already knew. The question is whether Ms. Monroe wants to resolve this through negotiation or prefers to face us in court." Brooklyn looked up from her position on the steps, mascara beginning to streak down her cheeks. "What do you want?" "Full restitution," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Every dollar earned from content featuring stolen images, complete public acknowledgement of the fraud, formal apology to the artists whose work was plagiarized, and agreement to never engage in similar practices again." The terms were harsh but fair. Brooklyn had profited significantly from the stolen images, using them to attract followers and secure brand partnerships that generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. "How much?" Brooklyn asked quietly. "Our preliminary calculation suggests approximately $400,000 in direct financial benefit from the fraudulent posts. Plus punitive damages and legal fees, we're looking at roughly $600,000 total." Brooklyn's gasp was audible. $600,000 represented more than her entire net worth, more than she could possibly pay without liquidating everything she owned. "I don't have that kind of money," she whispered.
"Then perhaps you should have considered the consequences before committing fraud," Sarah replied, with professional detachment. "We're not unsympathetic to financial hardship, but theft of intellectual property carries serious penalties." Ryan, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "What if she agrees to full public disclosure and restitution? What if she does everything you're asking?" Sarah considered this. "If Miss Monroe demonstrates genuine remorse through complete transparency, public admission of fraud, detailed acknowledgement of every stolen image, cooperation with other victimized photographers, we might consider a payment plan for the financial damages. It was a lifeline, but one that required Brooklyn to publicly destroy the image she had spent years building. Her entire influencer career would end, replaced by infamy as a cautionary tale about digital theft. "I need to think," Brooklyn said again, but her voice had lost its earlier desperation. Reality was setting in, the understanding that her choices had narrowed to two equally devastating options: financial ruin through litigation or professional suicide through confession. While Brooklyn grappled with her impossible choice, James turned his attention back to me. "Madison, I meant what I said about recommending your work for the International Photography Awards, but there's something else I want to discuss." He pulled out his business card, writing something on the back before handing it to me. "I'm opening a new gallery in Seattle focused on emerging photographic talent. After seeing your work today, both the portfolio pieces and the candid shots you captured during the ceremony, I'd like to offer you a solo exhibition." The world seemed to tilt sideways. A solo exhibition. At a gallery owned by James Mitchell, one of the most respected photographers in the industry? The show would run for 6 weeks, featuring your portrait work alongside the documentary images you captured today. I think the contrast between your planned artistic vision and your spontaneous journalistic eye would create a compelling narrative. I stared at the business card, hardly believing what I was hearing. After years of having my work dismissed as a hobby, suddenly I was being offered opportunities that could launch a legitimate photography career. "There's more," James continued. "The gallery opening typically attracts significant media attention. Art critics, other gallery owners, magazine editors. It's the kind of exposure that can define a career trajectory." Around us, the wedding reception continued its strange transformation from celebration to crisis management. Guests were beginning to leave, uncomfortable with the drama that had overtaken the evening. The catering staff moved quietly through the space, clearing tables while trying to remain invisible to the livestream cameras. But in the center of it all, I stood holding James Mitchell's business card like a passport to a future I had barely dared to imagine. "Why me?" I asked quietly. "You could feature any established photographer. Why take a chance on someone unknown?" James smiled, the first genuine warmth I'd seen from him all evening. "Because authenticity is rare in this business. Most photographers learn technique first and develop vision second. But you have something that can't be taught: the ability to see truth in a moment and capture it without pretense." He gestured toward Brooklyn, still sitting on the marble steps in her ruined wedding dress. "Your sister built her career on borrowed beauty, stolen moments, fabricated experiences. But every image in your portfolio, every shot you took today, reveals something genuine about your subjects. That's the difference between decoration and art." The compliment meant more than any family praise ever had. Coming from someone who understood the craft, who could recognize the years of work and study that went into developing an artistic voice. The exhibition would open in 6 weeks. That gives us time to properly curate the work, create accompanying materials, generate media interest. Are you interested? I looked around the reception hall, at Brooklyn wrestling with the consequences of her choices, at our parents trying to process the collapse of their golden daughter's empire, and at Ryan questioning everything he thought he knew about his new wife. Then I looked back at James Mitchell, successful photographer and gallery owner, offering me the kind of opportunity I had dreamed about but never expected to receive. "Yes," I said simply. "Excellent. I'll have my assistant send you the exhibition agreement tomorrow. We'll also need to discuss pricing for the pieces. I expect most of your work will sell, and you'll want to establish fair market rates." Sell? The idea that people might actually pay money for my photographs? That my artistic vision might have commercial value felt surreal. After years of giving away my work or charging barely enough to cover expenses. From across the hall, Brooklyn's voice rose in conversation with Sarah Chen and Ryan.
The three of them huddled in intense discussion about damage control and financial settlements. Whatever they decided, Brooklyn's career as she had built it was over. But standing there with James Mitchell's business card in my hand, surrounded by the wreckage of my sister's fraudulent empire, I felt something I had never experienced before. The solid ground of professional recognition earned through legitimate means. My work would speak for itself. My vision would find its audience. My dreams would no longer require anyone else's permission to pursue. The wedding that was supposed to celebrate Brooklyn's triumph had become the launching pad for my career. Not through theft or manipulation or digital fraud, but through the simple act of creating honest work and allowing it to be seen. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged, in the spotlight I had earned through my own talent, holding opportunities I had created through my own effort, building a future that belonged entirely to me. The reckoning had been complete. The recognition had finally found its rightful owner.
6 weeks after Brooklyn's wedding, I stood in the pristine white space of Mitchell Contemporary Gallery in Seattle, watching strangers examine my photographs with the kind of serious attention I had dreamed of receiving for years. The opening reception buzzed with conversations between art critics, collectors, and magazine editors who moved through the space like connoisseurs evaluating fine wine. The exhibition was titled Authentic Moments, featuring 24 pieces that chronicled my evolution from careful studio portraiture to spontaneous documentary work. The wedding photographs occupied the gallery's most prominent wall, showing Brooklyn's ceremony not as the fairy tale she had orchestrated, but as a complex human drama filled with genuine emotion and barely concealed tensions. James Mitchell appeared beside me, champagne glass in hand, and satisfaction written across his features. 9 pieces sold in the first hour, he announced quietly, including the entire wedding series to a private collector who's donating them to the Museum of Contemporary Photography. 9 sales represented more income than I had earned in the previous 18 months of freelance work combined. But the validation carried more weight than the financial security. People with discerning taste and considerable resources had chosen to live with my artistic vision, to display my work in spaces where they would encounter it daily. The Portland Museum of Art called this afternoon. James continued. They want to discuss including 3 of your portraits in their upcoming exhibition on Pacific Northwest emerging artists. It opens in January and runs for 4 months. A museum exhibition, the kind of institutional recognition that established careers and opened doors to teaching opportunities, grants, and representation by major galleries. I had submitted my portfolio to American Photo Magazine, hoping for a small feature, never imagining it would lead to museum-quality recognition. There's been interest from collectors in San Francisco and Los Angeles as well, James added. Your next show could be part of a traveling exhibition if you're interested in expanding your reach beyond the Pacific Northwest. The possibilities stretched before me like an uncharted map. Professional representation, financial sustainability through artistic work, and the chance to build a career around the vision I had been developing in secret for years. But even as I absorbed the magnitude of these opportunities, my thoughts kept drifting to Brooklyn. 3 weeks after her wedding, she had posted a 30-minute video confession that had effectively ended her influencer career. The response from her followers was swift and merciless. Brand partnerships canceled overnight, her audience hemorrhaging daily, her once lucrative platform reduced to a cautionary tale shared in digital marketing courses. She had named every photographer whose work she had stolen, provided detailed explanations of how the fraud was executed, and announced her permanent retirement from social media marketing. The video had been painful to watch, but undeniably genuine. Her remorse cutting through years of carefully constructed facade. "Have you spoken to your sister recently?" James asked, seemingly reading my thoughts. I shook my head. She and Ryan are in counseling. The financial settlement with the photographers whose work she stole required selling their house.
They're living in a rental apartment now, working through payment plans that will take years to complete. The conversation was interrupted by a woman in her 50s, approaching with obvious purpose. She wore the kind of understated elegance that suggested serious money, designer clothing that looked effortless, jewelry that caught light without demanding attention.
Ms. Monroe? I'm Catherine Westfield from Westfield Fine Art in Manhattan. I've been following your work since the American Photo feature, and I'm very impressed with what I see here tonight. Manhattan, the center of the American art world, where careers were made and artistic legacies established. I had never imagined my work reaching that level of attention. I'd like to discuss representation, Catherine continued. We specialize in emerging photographers who demonstrate both technical excellence and unique artistic vision. Based on tonight's reception and the critical response to your recent magazine coverage, I believe you're ready for national exposure. National exposure. Gallery representation in New York City. The conversation felt surreal, like someone else's life being offered to me by mistake. What would that involve? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Initially, inclusion in our group exhibition featuring 5 emerging photographers from across the country. If the response is positive, we'd consider a solo show within 18 months. Our artists typically see their work placed in major private collections and occasionally acquired by museums. She handed me her business card, thick cardstock with elegant typography that spoke of established success and institutional credibility. Think about it, she said, but don't think too long. Opportunities like this require decisive action. As Catherine moved on to examine other pieces, James whistled softly. Westfield Fine Art represents some of the most successful photographers in the country. Getting their attention usually takes years of building reputation and making connections. Why me? I asked. 6 weeks ago, I was editing photos in a hotel bathroom, trying to meet submission deadlines while hiding from my own family's dismissal. James considered the question seriously, because authenticity resonates in ways that manufactured content never can. Your sister built her career on borrowed beauty and stolen moments, but every image in your portfolio reveals something genuine about your subjects. That's the difference between decoration and art. Across the gallery, I spotted our parents examining the wedding photographs with expressions I had never seen before. Dad was deep in conversation with a collector, discussing technical aspects of the images with the kind of enthusiasm he usually reserved for business deals. Mom stood transfixed in front of the portrait of Brooklyn during her vows, seeing, perhaps for the first time, the vulnerability and complexity I had captured in that moment. They had driven up from Portland for the opening, bringing an enthusiasm for my work that felt revolutionary after years of polite dismissal. During dinner before the reception, Dad had asked detailed questions about my equipment, my process, my business plan for building a sustainable career. Mom had shown my exhibition announcement to everyone she encountered, introducing me as my daughter, the professional photographer, with pride that seemed to surprise even her. We never understood what you were building, Mom had admitted over appetizers. We thought it was just a hobby because you never talked about it as anything more serious.
She was right. I had protected my dreams from their skepticism by keeping them small and private, never allowing myself to articulate the full scope of my ambitions. In trying to shield my confidence from their doubt, I had also hidden the evidence of my growing competence. The gallery began to empty as the evening wound down, guests moving on to dinner reservations and other commitments. I found myself alone with my photographs for the first time since their installation, able to see them purely as artistic objects rather than documents of family drama. Under the professional lighting, freed from the context of Brooklyn's wedding and the chaos that had surrounded their creation, the images existed as independent statements about light, composition, and human emotion. They were good. Not perfect, not yet at the level I hoped to achieve someday, but honest and skillful and entirely my own. My phone buzzed with a text message. Ryan, reaching out for the first time since the wedding. Saw the gallery coverage in photography today in the Seattle Times. Beautiful work. Brooklyn wanted me to tell you she's proud of you. Really proud. She's been following the exhibition coverage online and says the wedding photos capture something true about that day that she couldn't see while living it. The message surprised me with its emotional impact. Despite everything that had happened, despite the years of feeling invisible in Brooklyn's shadow, she was still my sister. Her approval still mattered, even though I no longer needed it to feel worthy of recognition. I typed back carefully, "Thank you. Tell her I hope she finds her own authentic path forward. There's room for both of us to succeed without competing." Because that was what this experience had taught me. Success wasn't a zero-sum game where one person's recognition required another's diminishment. Brooklyn's fall hadn't been necessary for my rise. Her fraud hadn't created my opportunities. The timing might have been coincidental, but my achievement was independent of her failure. James approached as I was putting my phone away. "There's something else we should discuss. I've been contacted by 3 different photography schools asking if you'd be interested in teaching workshops on authentic documentary photography. Apparently, your wedding series has generated significant interest in academic circles." Teaching. Sharing the techniques and perspectives I had developed through years of experimentation and study. The idea appealed to me in ways I hadn't expected, offering a chance to guide others who might be struggling with the same self-doubt and family skepticism I had experienced. The workshops would be part-time initially, but they could develop into a more substantial teaching position if you're interested in academic work alongside your gallery career. Multiple revenue streams, professional credibility, the chance to influence the next generation of photographers. The life I was being offered exceeded anything I had imagined possible when I submitted my portfolio 6 weeks earlier. "I'm interested," I said. "All of it. The gallery representation, the teaching opportunities, the museum exhibitions. I'm ready to build a real career around this work." James smiled with genuine warmth. "Good, because talent without ambition is just potential energy. You've finally decided to convert yours into kinetic force." As the gallery lights dimmed and the cleaning crew began their work, I took one final walk through the exhibition space. Tomorrow I would return to the practical aspects of building a photography career, negotiating with galleries, planning future projects, developing the business skills necessary to sustain artistic work. But tonight belonged to pure satisfaction. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by work that belonged entirely to me, displayed in a space where it could be seen and appreciated, creating connections with viewers who understood the vision I was trying to share. The wedding photographs on the far wall caught my attention one last time. In them, Brooklyn glowed with the happiness of someone whose dreams were coming true, unaware that her empire was built on stolen foundations. But they also captured Ryan's genuine love, our parents' pride, the authentic joy of guests who believed they were witnessing something beautiful. Truth was complicated. Brooklyn's fraud had been real, her choices destructive and wrong. But the love surrounding her that day had also been real, worth documenting and preserving, even in the context of her deception. Walking out into the Seattle evening, my reflection multiplied in the gallery windows behind me. I looked exactly like what I had always been, but never fully believed, an artist whose work was finally finding its audience. I had stopped waiting for permission to be seen. I had learned to see myself first, and everything else had followed from that fundamental shift in perspective. The wedding that was supposed to celebrate Brooklyn's perfect life had become the launching pad for my authentic career, not because I needed her failure to succeed, but because the crisis had forced me to stop hiding and start claiming the recognition I had already earned. Brooklyn was learning to build something real from the wreckage of her stolen success. I was learning to build something lasting from the foundation of my authentic work. Both of us were finally becoming who we were meant to be, just not in the ways anyone had expected. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.